kind of the first step is to have Caitlin here. So she's going to talk kind of about her work and hopefully give us some examples of how you're using it. But it's really fun. One of the things I was saying to Caitlin before she came, when she first came, is I realized over the weekend how much we already use data analytics. Like, it sounds like it's this really complicated, hard math thing, but we're already using it when we look at things online, when we're, checking stock prices or, doing baseball statistics, and there's just analytics everywhere. And there's lots of tools that you guys are already using, just Googling things. And so it's kind of a great skill set to have, and definitely something that the accounting firms are hoping you'll have some knowledge of. Not that you master it, but that you are aware of it. So with that, I'll let Caitlin talk about her job and the field.
Great, thank you. Everyone online, you guys can hear me okay? Hopefully, I think we've checked this before. So anyway, my name is Kalyan Hess. I am a senior associate with KPMG. I just got promoted, about a month ago, so still relatively new. A little bit of background on me. So I did my undergraduate studies at University of South Florida, and I decided to join KPMG. One of the reasons why I joined KPMG, of course, main reason was because of the people, but they also came out with this new Masters of Accounting with Data Analytics program. And for the first class, they offered it at the Ohio State University and Villanova. So I went to Ohio State, and how our program is set up is, we go for a fall semester, then we go do an internship during the spring semester, we return during the summer, wrap up our classes, graduate, and then we start full-time in the fall. So I just started full-time last fall. So, disclaimer, I haven't had that much audit experience under my belt. I just got promoted to senior associate after 10 months. Excuse me, public speaking is not my strong suit, so I'm going to be a little awkward up here. So the reason why I wanted to do the program is because in my undergraduate studies, I developed this interest in data analytics. And I think it primarily stemmed from the fact that I was doing my honors thesis on the idea of continuous auditing. And, one of the ideas to make that possible, so continuous auditing, the idea of actually like doing the audit throughout the year rather than just like having a busy season. And, as an auditor, that sounds nice, right? Like that you're going to spread out your work and not just have it centered in one season. But, there's a lot of stipulations that, kind of prevent that. But one of the drivers that could make it possible is the use of data analytics. So, one thing about using data analytics in accounting is that you have to have a passion for it. I know a lot of students, or my colleagues that are my level sometimes still get terrified with Excel. So, kind of have to break out of your shell, your bubble, and get like used to using those tools. So Excel is just like one simple example. However, data nowadays, we've gone from, like maybe it's just like 1,000 rows to now we have millions and millions of rows. I've worked with a data set before that was 12 million rows. And if you try to throw that into Excel and, filter one of the columns, it's just going to crash on you, and you're not going to get anything done. So now they have, more advanced data tools out there. Just that you can use like standard, query language and whatnot with coding that you can like type in and try to do it, or they have more user-friendly ones. So for example, KPMG has this tool called Alteryx, where it's basically just kind of like a drag and drop of, I guess like different functions. So if you say that you want to filter a column, you just kind of like drag and drop it and it automatically kind of like writes the code for you. So super user-friendly, but definitely having a little bit of coding background helps. So back to, using data analytics in accounting, it's not really a new concept, right? So, auditors have been doing data analytics since, it was on pen and paper. And of course, like thinking nowadays with, all the transactions that a company has, it would be a pain to do the audit on paper. And, some of our partners at KPMG and the other big four firms, they, they started their careers doing that. So now, having these incoming, staff members that have, they have a sense of, technology and they're comfortable using it. The partners are like, whoa, what is this? They barely even know how to use their email. So just having, like the new staff coming in, being comfortable with it is helping. But like one of our primary uses for data analytics, which surprisingly we haven't used quite enough yet, is for risk assessment. So imagine that you have, a journal entry population and, you want to kind of like test segregation of duties. You might have another population that tells you, okay, these users have, they're able to create the journal entry, and then these users are able to approve it. So you can basically summarize the data, and it can tell you like the different combinations of users, like if this person wrote the journal entry, this one approved it. And if there's like an incorrect matching, then, that's, segregation of duties bad. Okay. So that's one example. There's plenty of other things you can do with the journal entry population. I think that's kind of like the biggest item. Or also like if you have an inventory population, you can identify slow moving and obsolete inventory just by looking at, how long it's been on the shelf. Part of like our standard auditing procedures where we actually go and do an inventory count, that might not be as helpful with identifying, slow moving inventory. Although technically, clients, they should kind of separate those items, especially like if they're damaged, they should have an area where they're just like there. And that's, that's one use that, or one example of like why data analytics can't just be the only solution to an audit, and with like all these technological capabilities that we have, you still need that human interaction. So data analytics, the reason why the big four firms are moving towards that is for efficiency and audit quality. Because now that you have all these technologies, you can take those data sets and dive deeper into them, and like the level of precision of your, I guess like investigation, it increases. And you have so much more vision of what's going on. Okay, so does anyone have any questions so far? I know that's kind of like all over the place.
Let me mic it up. I'm going to do the little game show host.
I was wondering if you could give an example of a time when you used data analytics and it had a different outcome than you thought, and how did the running the analysis point that out?
I haven't had that much experience with actually like doing the data analytics routines, because I think that's one other thing that's important to note is, going through the master's program that KPMG sponsored me for, the goal was really to get us comfortable with the data sets, but also for us to be that bridge between the auditors and our IT side. Because as the auditors, we're not really allowed to do these data analytics routines for consistency purposes, because it's very easy to mess something up. Maybe like you miss a filter, so on. So we have other teams that do it. So we haven't, my client specifically on my team, like we haven't run that many routines before, but an example might be, we do like high risk journal entry testing, and our client is very clean, so we wouldn't expect, for example, we do a word search for, the CEO's name to see if, there was any sort of instance where in the description of the journal entry, someone said, oh, it's because the CEO told me to. And, management override controls, So that's a bad instance, I guess. So if, the high risk journal entry routine does come back with, like, oh, the CEO's name was mentioned like 10 times, and we weren't expecting that to happen, that I guess could be an instance. Or also you could do a routine where you compare accounts against each other. So for example, it's kind of a red flag if you, debit depreciation and then credit an accounts receivable. It doesn't make sense. So that could also be like a red flag. I don't think you would expect, that it's particular combination.
Kaylin, would the data analytics still allow you to run that against, say, all transactions then, right? As opposed to in the olden days, we would just get a sample, right? And hopefully that sample, my class knows, was representative of the universe, right? And you always have sampling risk, et cetera. But with data analytics, my understanding now is that the software, you didn't say Qualtrics, you said Alteryx, would allow you to run that across 100% transactions. And so your opportunity to identify problems with the controls, management override the controls in your specific example, or improper separation of duty, much higher batting average, that your ultimate opinion on the controls or on the financial statements is going to be more reliable.
Yeah. So although, you still can't have absolute assurance, that's always never going to be a thing. You can get very close, but it's never going to be quite there. But being able to run analytical procedures over 100% of the population can give you, more assurance than, just like, what we had 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
So in the area of accounting estimates, then I would imagine the data analytics helps you significantly because you can run 100% analysis. Do you ever do a look back at estimates that were made in previous periods to see if those estimates were reliable, and then do you use data analytics for that sort of thing?
Yeah. I haven't particularly seen that. I'm sure that is something that some of our teams do. For me specifically, I spent a lot of my time auditing pension liabilities. So with that estimate, it's not something that we ourselves can really build. We send that to our internal actuaries to, assess the reasonableness of, the assumptions for valuing the pension liability. But one of our procedures is to do a look back and, take a look at what the actual, payout was, and then what they estimated it, and determine if that was reasonable or not.
Any questions from the audience, my students? Remember, you're writing this up, so you might want to let me go ahead back and, excuse me.
Didn't know you guys were writing this up.
Oh, yeah.
I do have a question. Forgive me, I'm not an accountant, I'm a lawyer, so I'm looking at this perhaps from a little bit different perspective. But after you've run your analytics and the information that comes to you and the information you find out through running your analytics, do you find yourself in the position of needing new kinds of data, new classes of data? Do you send them back out to bring you more stuff?
Yeah, occasionally we do that. So this year we used a routine that KPMG, or a tool, I guess, that KPMG developed that we called, it's like iJet, which is the journal entry testing or journal entry tool, or we have a lot of acronyms. There's too many to keep track of. But when we were trying to set that up, and use our routines, very often, every time that we got our journal entry population, we'd be looking at him like, okay, well, first of all, we need to know if this was like a manual journal entry or an automatic journal entry. So we would go back and forth with the client trying to get the correct fields and whatnot. Yeah.
Order up. Oh, sorry. do you ever have to order up something significant where you have to send teams out to scour anything, or I mean, is it manual, or maybe that's more of an involved question than I realize?
Yeah, not necessarily. I don't think we have had any instances where we just didn't have enough information where we had to go back and forth and say like, okay, no, we still need this, we need this. And if they said like, oh, well, we can't give that to you, it's like, I'm sure you can, but.
So nothing wildly unexpected that you find in the data analytics where like, oh, here's a factor that we hadn't really thought about that maybe we need to get more information about. That's not the sort of thing you would anticipate happening, or that hasn't happened to you.
Are you referring to like findings where if we find something we have to go and collect more support for it?
Yeah, maybe, or maybe just something out of left field. I'm aware of a whole realm of correlations that people don't think about, and I'm just wondering if that's relevant to what it is that you do.
Yeah, if there's anything that comes up where it's like, okay, well, this looks a little odd, then you might, follow up with the client and say, hey, while we were doing this, we identified this. Could you please explain more or provide the supporting documentation for it?
And that also makes me wonder if you have collateral insights that are helpful to your clients in ways that you hadn't anticipated as a result of the process, even if it isn't something that you were looking for.
Oh, yeah. It's a lot of times we run into things that we weren't looking for. Like one example with my client last year, I was going through a listing of, new hires and rehires or transfers, just like looking at the employee population. And I noticed that for 1 month, they didn't have any new hires. So I'm like, okay, that's a little odd. And then I was looking more into it, and they had a lot of transfers. It was a significant amount of transfers that moved from one region to another. And when we followed up with our client about that, because that might have an impact on that specific region's liability. As I mentioned before, I was testing the pension liability, and our testing, we have to test like by the region. So if one region's, if those employees that transferred, if their pension liability didn't transfer with them, then that would have had a material impact on it. And we wanted to make sure that the client was properly accounting for that and making sure that they were, following through. Yeah, you're welcome.
Any questions from anyone else from the audience? Yep.
Hi, I have a quick question. So what kind of skill set you recommend for students to prepare if they want to pursue this career for data and analytics? What type of computer languages? I know that GGU is providing a data analytics program that they need students to learn R language, Python, and also some students maybe learn MySQL or SQL. So do you think those computer languages are essential for data analytics in your current job?
I wouldn't say that they're essential, but they definitely help. As I said, it's once you're able to realize what you can do with the population, I think that's what opens up a lot of doors for you. So if you have the opportunity to go work with different, statistical softwares or, like coding softwares such as, you mentioned Python, R is another one, SQL or MySQL, just playing around with those just for a little bit. Once you learn one coding language, it makes it so much easier to learn all these other ones. But my favorite is using SQL. But I haven't used it personally in my job. But as I said, like once you get comfortable using, those languages and understanding like how the language like filters the and like manipulates the data, you can pretty much do a whole lot of things, and it gives you so many more.
I'm sorry,
insights.
did you say
SQL? So is it called like statistical query language or standard query language or some sort of query language? Yeah.
So far we've heard how you've used data analytics for in support of the audit opinion. Sounds like in support of the report on internal control, it has some aspect there. Do you find yourself leveraging the data analytics for recommendations outside of the area of just the pure financial statement audit, consulting type areas, helping clients to improve their operations?
As an auditor, no, because that, kind of digs into the independence issues. Because, first and foremost, for the auditors, we shouldn't be offering consulting services to our client or performing those. So, other firms might have, a consulting practice that offers those data analytics, services to the client. But as an auditor, we don't provide it ourselves. Our data analytics are primarily for our audit work, and they stay with us. So, for example, if we see that, one of their customers, customers has a very delayed receivable or paying. So it takes a while for them to pay.
Delay on the payment of
delay
receivable.
on payment. We're not going to go and inform them saying hey, they're consistently late on payment. Or if we identify that maybe 30% of their transactions come from the same customer, we're not going to go tell them that. Although that's information for us to know that, okay, so if they lose this one customer, how's that going to impact their revenue? It's going to decline by 30%. And, that might result or specifically if, let's say it was I don't know why a company would have 70% of their transactions coming from the same customer, but if they lose that customer, or if that customer goes under and they're no longer able to pay, that could create a going concern for the client.
So you would be able to run an analysis against 100% population, be able to see basically doing an aging, but to be able to see specific customers that are falling delinquent, and from that almost do a forward-looking analysis as this is the potential for a bad debt. And so we're able to have a more reliable number for bad debt expense, allowance for doubtful accounts on the financial statements. But instead of having to do that when Moses was a boy with spreadsheets that went on forever and couldn't necessarily handle all that data, now you can use that to come up with that much more reliable estimate.
Right. So, whereas, years ago it would have taken maybe hours to do something, you can do it in minutes just by uploading the population to some of these tools.
That was another question. The software now, do you need your clients to provide you the data in any specific format, or can they pretty much, does the data analytics allow you to interface directly with their software?
I think it depends. I'm not sure if we particularly interface with their software and we're able to pull the information that we need. I think it's just something that we need to coordinate with our client beforehand and say, we need these fields, please provide us these fields. But I don't think it necessarily comes in any particular format. We do have, our IT side that basically takes the fields that the client provides us and links them up with the fields that our tools kind of identify them as, if that makes sense. So especially speaking on that particular tool that I'm thinking of. So we call it CAP, which is KPMG Automated Audit Procedures. And it has some pretty cool functionalities. We're able to do automated three-way matches. So, one of the benefits of being in this, technology-driven world is that most invoices and payment support is all digital, and if you can somehow interface the systems, you'll have the full population of purchases or sales, and then you'll have all the supporting documents with it. And it will tell you okay, this transaction is missing, the invoice, this transaction is missing, purchase order, shipping and payment, whatever, and it can also identify discrepancies, so it's just kind of automatic vouching and saying okay, so there was this dollar amount discrepancy between this transaction and the invoice. And then because it can do 100% of the population, it can tell you like, okay, this is how much it's off by, unless, it's missing a document, then you also might have to extrapolate with that.
So remember Accounting 310, guys, where we were talking about for the completeness assertion, for example, comparing shipping documents to the invoices, but we also talked about having to pull a sample and then see to what extent that sample was providing us the assurance we needed for our audit report. What Kalyan is saying is you don't have to pull a sample. You test every single transaction to see if there's a match going from the shipping document to the invoice. And here we have a shipping document, no invoice. How come? And I always tell my students that's when the client says, oh, thanks, that was Bob. He used to make that mistake all the time. We let him go. But our professional skepticism is now heightened if you see enough of those, and that could lead you to other areas that impact the internal control, concerns about whether there may be potential for fraud, etc. Questions, Accounting 310, guys? Really? Okay, that paper just became a 6-page paper. Any questions? Well, you're not Accounting 310, but you might.
So how have you how's that impacted controls testing? So like the way that we've done controls testing in the past is like we kind of have like some sort of methodology saying, okay, this control happens like once a day, so we're going to do a sample size of 40 plus or something like that. And then but if you're doing it, I guess like that kind of answers my question, right? Because if we are using this big data and we're measuring everything, then we would probably just test everything.
Yep. But sometimes that it just all depends on the format that you have all the support, because sometimes like the client still uses paper and you won't be able to test 100% of the population just by throwing it into a tool. Sometimes you have to revert back to, standard sampling procedures where you're sampling, 25 transactions out of the population of, 3,000, 4,000, a million.
So like you were saying, right? So there's definitely going to be exceptions like right off the bat, right? Because I mean, there's a very low likelihood that they're going to be attaching like their invoices consistently across like every single one of their transactions that happen over the course of the year. I mean, I guess it depends on how good their controls are or whatever, but
right.
I mean, if you see that like right off the bat, are you just going to go, I guess you would go back to your planning and then just say, okay, assess like,
you might just mark it as a control deficiency at that point. If there's, maybe like 1 or 2 errors here and there might not be completely indicative of control deficiency.
Yeah. It is the deviation rate.
Yeah.
And so you're able to then determine if you've blown the control test or not, and how that's going to impact the time extended nature of your further audit procedures, your opinion, if you're a public company, your opinion on management's opinion about the internal control, but you're not having to sample. I think that's kind of where you're thinking, wait a minute, we have to do this projection, and that's rated that against our tolerable rates.
Right.
I had a question. I'm going to share an experience. I worked for the federal government for 26 years and spent a fair amount of time on financial statement audit, but then moved over to program audit. And one of the things that we did looking at the Department of Housing and Urban Development was take the financial statements for all 3,100 housing agencies that there are across the country, and we developed a set of indicators of problem housing agencies. For example, there was one line item on the financial statements that showed if they were bouncing checks. And if you were bouncing checks, we figured, well, you're probably having financial difficulty. Makes sense, right? We've all had experiences like that, and probably some time in our lives. So why are they bouncing checks? And then what we did was we compared that against the score that HUD gave to the housing agencies on their financial performance. And we found that there were about 300 of those 3,400 housing agencies that were bouncing checks, yet HUD's score was saying that they were financially viable, yet they're bouncing checks. And so we asked HUD, hey, you really should routinely look at that line item and follow up with those, et cetera. Is that the kind of thing? Let me finish my story. We did all that with Excel. Is that the kind of thing now that you would be using? I still remember the person I had working with me, May Lee. To this day, when she sees me, she goes the other direction, because she's afraid I'm going to ask her to pull down another 3,400 housing agencies off of an Excel report. So she did all the work, but it was very tedious for her. Is that the kind of thing that you can do much more routinely, cost effectively, because of the power of the software and whatnot that are available now?
Yeah. As you said, it's something that's more routine, right?
Right. I would think now, before with the time budget, and audit, there's absolutely no way you would do that sort of it's essentially was an analytical procedure against all the transactions, or in this case, all the entities that were coming under the scope of this program audit because of the time constraints. Of course, in a government auditing setting, we're not doing that for money. There's no profit involved. So we might sit there and spend a year working on something, looking at that. Whereas in a competitive CPA environment, there's no way that you could do that. Whereas now you can do that cost effectively. Even though it's not a consulting engagement, you ultimately are able to help the client to improve their operations just through the process of the financial statement audit, to look at the internal controls, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, because we have the capabilities to get those sort of insights, but again, we're the auditors, not the consultants. So when I was going into this program, I was telling everyone, like, yeah, I'm going to go do the data analytics program with KPMG. And they're like, oh, so you're moving into advisory? I'm like, no, I'm still going to stay with audit. But that is, we have those insights. We're able to tell them, like, hey, you're bouncing checks, or like, this is why, or hey, heads up, there's a chance that this customer is not going to pay you, and so on.
Find that the clients say uncle much more quickly than if you're taking a sample and they're saying, well,
you always have to have or give them the chance to explain, because there's still probably a very good reason why it was the way it was. And sometimes you have to just kind of sit back and, not necessarily take that as an answer, because you still want some sort of support for it, because, inquiry alone is not sufficient.
I'm going to ask another question, but before I do, because I've been told to quiet down. I'm usually not told to speak up. So I have another question, but I want to sort of open it up to the class here. You have 3 questions?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
So the first one is, has utilizing data analytics for audits decreased the amount of people needed to complete an audit?
I wouldn't say it decreases the amount of people necessarily, but it does save time, and it also, enhances your audit quality. So it's not something that's like, replacing the audit workforce. You still need the human power to get things done and make sure that everything is like getting completed. And, KPMG is developing some artificial intelligence to kind of like, or cognitive technologies, I think that's what we refer to it as, to kind of like assist with like our procedures. But ultimately, the judgment lies with us. We can't necessarily rely on a computer to make those judgments. That makes sense.
And the second one was how, or is it very expensive for a big four to implement this type of technology? And for the clients, are they, I guess, inclined to implement technology to be able to make their audits easier, like I guess match with the auditing companies?
Yeah, so not sure what exactly the cost is from, like the Big Four side in developing these technologies. I'm sure it's a hefty bill. But, in the end, in the long run, it does save us time when we're completing items, and therefore, like, we cut down hours, we can bill the client less. So, of course, they're, pushing for working with us in, like doing these analytical procedures or, we're also having a big push for automation. So earlier we were talking about, routine procedures that now, you can build as simple as, Excel macro to just run the procedures over and over again. So if something takes you maybe like 5 hours to do typically, and just by a press of a button, it takes about 3 minutes, you're already saving so many billable hours.
And the last question is, what type of ongoing training do you personally get for data analytics, aside from, using it in the everyday basis for your job?
In the 10, 11 months that I've been with the firm full time, I don't think I've had a data analytics training since school. We do have trainings for, not just like the data analytics crowd, but like for all associates and senior associates to basically let us know of the tools that are rolling out and like how we need to approach them, in terms of documentation and what the guidance requires us to do and performing our procedures with them and whatnot.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We did have a few questions that were chatted in, so bear with me. I'm going to sort of read them. I think we've covered some of them, but is it easier to switch from tax to audit? And I don't know if that means, is it easier to switch from tax to audit versus audit to tax?
Or vice versa, I guess. Not sure. I wouldn't know. I've never worked in tax. Have never had a desire to work in tax.
We got the dean of the tax going here. She's turning red.
No, I could just say, I mean, certainly, it depends what context you're asking. If you're in a large firm and you want to change, groups within the firm, that's going to be dependent on the firm. If you're asking because you want to do data analytics, it's actually probably more applicable to tax right now than it is to audit. So there's lots of ways, because tax, we're always analyzing the tax impact and looking towards the future, or trying to help companies make decisions about what they're going to do. And so we want to know what the tax impact is. So data analytics, we can actually go to the company and do the data analytics and pull things and give them advice. And so it's actually a really great thing to combine with tax.
Okay, great. We had a question. Were you trained on data science principles in mining techniques, or how was training at KPMG? Now, I'm putting that up there, but I'm going to ask to put a little different spin on that question.
Okay.
Can you describe the program at Ohio State? Is that your school that you went to, or did KPMG send you there after you started? I wonder if you could describe a little bit more about how that program worked.
Okay, yeah. So the first year that they offered the program was when I went through the program. So I graduated from undergrad in December 2016. I did a busy season internship with KPMG from January to March, took the summer to do CPA exams, and then I started the program. And then after the 1 year of the program, I started full time. And the structure of the program varies by university to university. So especially for the first year of the program, when KPMG approached these universities, when they approached Villanova, they'd never had a Mac program before. So they're like, okay, great, we'll do this. That's fine. And we'll, do whatever you guys ask us. And KPMG's like, okay, great. And, it's just the 25 or 26 KPMG students there in the MAC program. But when they approached Ohio State, they were more so like, oh no, we're going to tell you what to do. You're not going to tell us what to do. We're going to run this program. We're going to, educate your students and whatnot. We'll use your softwares, but this is going to be on us type thing. And we were integrated with the other MAC students, that weren't sponsored by KPMG. And, I honestly like that a lot better just because it provided more diversity in thought. And we had a lot of international students too. And they're some of the brightest people I have ever met. But in terms of the work at Ohio State, it was very academic focused. So we had accounting research, we had accounting like policy. So one was very like confusing or misleading for the names, but we basically just sat there and read different academic papers about not even accounting, it was more so like finance, and we would just discuss them. So I think that was like the accounting policy and research class. And then we had actual accounting research where we basically went into the guidance, like the FASB codification and PCOB stuff. And, we were basically given kind of like a case and we had to outline like the guidance and stuff for it. But we also did have some data classes. We did have accounting with data analytics, which was basically just another statistics class on steroids. And it was a little difficult because we were using this software that no one ever uses. It has its own coding language and it was so confusing. It's called SAS. If you ever hear of SAS, don't use it. Just do yourself a favor. And then we had a data tools class where we actually did learn more of like the statistical software, like R. I think we may have used Tableau in there for data visualization. I think there was another one that we used. Not sure. And there was like another data tools class that we took. So I guess we did have quite a few data tools classes, but a lot of it was more focused on data visualization. Because that's kind of like the best way to summarize your insights. It's a very clean look, but also like you're not sitting there and actually like looking at tables of data. If you're able to put something into a line graph or a pie chart, it provides you much like faster information. So that was kind of like how Ohio State had it set up. From my understanding with Villanova, they were more, I guess, like technical heavy in there. I'm not sure if they had a whole lot of like academic stuff, but since it was a master's of accounting, I'm sure they had to have some sort of accounting in there. As for how the programs are being run now, I'm not too sure. I did have one intern this past busy season who was going through the program at USC, and it sounded like USC is doing more of a in the field type work. So 2 days a week, you'll do academic classes. And then the other 2 days, you're actually in the field doing data analytics work, which is kind of interesting. And I wish that every school did that. But,
we had another question here. What is the timing of your audit procedures? I'm assuming we're talking about interim versus year end. And do you go on site to the client to do field work?
Yeah, we'll always go to the client to do field work, although I guess it also depends on the industry. So if you are auditing a hedge fund, they probably don't have a client site for you to go to, so you just kind of hang out in the office. But primarily we'll go to the client to do our field work and interim. My client specifically is pretty large, and we have our own cubicles on one of their floors, and we just kind of hang out. But as far as like data analytics with audit procedures and timing of that, my team specifically doesn't really do a lot of risk assessment with data analytics. Most of our stuff deals with our substantive procedures. I guess there is like one item that we do for planning, and it deals with the scoping of significant accounts. So you'll have your general ledger, and then you'll have all these GL accounts that wrap up into your significant accounts, which are the accounts that you're going to do your substantive procedures over. But that was a process that would take us weeks to complete, because we were like manually summarizing all the accounts and putting it into our what we call scoping matrix. And now we automated it with the help with one of our data teams, and now we just like send it off for them to run it, and then we get back the next day and it's done. So that's like one instance that we do it during planning, but I think most of our analytical procedures deal with our substantive testing.
Any other questions from the audience?
My question is how KPMG use like data analytics. Like what I know, like mostly they use Excel, right, in doing the procedures. So what they do, they appoint data analytic expert in each audit team, or just give training to the audit professionals?
So that's kind of like what KPMG is trying to change right now. So we won't have, a data analytics specialist on each team, but, allowing more, I guess, students to go through this program, be more comfortable. We're like sort of the data analytics specialists, although we're not allowed to actually do the data analytics routines. All that stuff has to be sent to our data team, which is like a separate department. They're more IT background and focused. So, and they don't really know much of anything about accounting or auditing. So we're also kind of like the bridge between the audit team and the data team. So one example of something I did is we were in the process of creating a practice data set for our new audit file software. And the data team didn't really know anything about accounting. So they're like, okay, we just want you to look at it and let us know, like, is this realistic? Like, is this something that you would see as like a real journal entry population? I take a look at it. I'm like, okay, I know it's like kind of difficult to just use randomization to create a make-up data set. But typically, journal entries will have more than just one debit and one credit. Sometimes it's, like 100 debits and one credit, or, any combination of any numbers. But as long as they balance, that's the most important part. And, for simplicity purposes and training purposes, I think it would have been sufficient. But, they asked for my opinion. So I was just, doing my job, just being, the bridge between the IT world and the audit world.
So the KPMG has a GDA team in India, right?
GDC, you're referring to?
GDC,
Yeah,
sorry.
our
So
global delivery
GDC also
center.
do data analytics on the behalf of KPMG?
Yeah, so they're basically our data team. Well, so our data team creates the routines, and then after that, we just send it to our global delivery center in India for them to run it. Okay. Because they have actual like specialists and professionals there that know what they're doing, and they have like set routines that they follow to make sure that everything's done correctly. Because if you do two, I guess, like items just out of order, sometimes that might just throw off the entire routine. So it's important that it's done the same way every single time, or I guess, I don't know, just to make sure that nothing gets messed up, even if it's just like pressing a button. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Any others? Okay, great.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, mentioned that the routines all get sent off to, the IT group. Is there anything in place to, double check if there is a mistake that's made, or is there any way that that gets caught or that chance gets accounted for?
Yeah. When we're building the routine, we like to kind of do a practice run first. So we'll use, former data set that we've already, like gone through the routine, and we know what, I guess, essentially the solution should be. So just by running that through the routine, and as long as we get the same results, we'll know that the routine works. But Even then, I think there can be circumstances where maybe like something changes and it might throw everything off. So I think that's something that our data team has to primarily look at, but we are responsible for reviewing the outputs of any of these like automated or analytical routines.
Any other questions? Yes.
I'm asking for my friend Bob. He's computer illiterate. How could you explain data analytics to a dummy? Like how you would explain it to?
Okay.
That's for Bob, right? Yeah. Okay.
For Bob. For Bob.
Yeah. Oh, Bob. Bob, we let him go. Bob. Oh, okay. Okay.
How do we? So it's basically taking, a data. So think of a table, that you have rows and columns, and each row might be like one instance of a transaction or item or whatever. And then in the columns, it's kind of like the attributes. So an attribute might be, for example, like name, address, phone number, item number, quantity, price. So, and then you have all the information that's like filled in. So you start with your data, and like analytics is basically just going into this data set and using what's there and like, summarizing it to basically provide you with information. And that information can just be anything that you can think of. So it can be as simple as like how many customers are there, or how many people live in the zip code, or what was the total amount of this product sold. Does that help a little bit? Yeah, I think like, just by the term analytics, it tends to scare people. Because I don't know, to me, it's like even just kind of like a little bit of a frightening word. But like, I think you might be overthinking it. Sorry, Bob is overthinking it. Bob is overthinking it.
So my question is, what you just said, we can do with Excel, right?
Mhm.
Same thing. So how you differentiate the results, Excel and data analytics? Is it more reliable? Or?
Well, Excel is data analytics. The things that you can do with Excel, like for example, pivoting the data. So just like making a pivot table, that's data analytics, or filtering on a certain column, that's data analytics.
So what we do in these softwares, we do in Excel too, right?
Yeah, you can do it in Excel as well.
Yeah.
But it also depends on how much data you have, because Excel can only handle so much.
Okay.
The computing power with Excel is not great.
So software can handle more quantity.
More quantity, and it might be less user friendly to use, but it's the only way that you're going to get it done. And that's why we create like automated routines, so that we don't have to do it again. We just click a button and it does it for us.
I'm going to ask another question. What are your thoughts, and not to make it too personal, but knowing this area, do you feel this has helped to advance you at KPMG in your career?
I would say it's not necessarily advancing me at KPMG in particular, but it does give me a little more leverage, I guess, over my peers, but also not necessarily, because just because I went through this program and have some data analytics skills doesn't mean that, my peers don't. They might have strengths in areas where I might not have strengths. But I think, the data analytics in going through the program and everything has definitely heightened my like problem solving skills. And, you know, if I'm faced with a large data set and I need to basically come up with a solution to a problem, you know, it's something that I can do. So one instance, you know, might be we were trying to come up with a different way to, I guess, like analyze our clients' HR or like payroll population. And our main goal was to see like how or what was the rate of their salary increase. So I had two extremely large populations to work with. And I had to create, you know, unique identifiers. So basically, you know, something that's how to identify one employee, because sometimes these employees in the population that I had didn't have like an employee number, for example. So I couldn't just match everything up on the employee number. Sometimes I had to combine the employee number with the name, with what was the other? There was another field that I was using, but I ended up creating this very long identifier that I was able to merge the populations. So I was basically able to take their salary from, you know, the current year population, put it into the prior year population, and then calculate the difference, and then end up calculating the rate and everything. But, you know, again, going back to Excel and its computing power, like it wasn't working, so I had to throw it into a software that we have. It's called Idea. I don't think it's not KPMG proprietary software. I think it's
generally
some general software. Yeah. So that sort of.
Well, just going back to my example with the housing agencies, you know, we had to have May come in and do that. I don't have the Excel skills to do that. So I had the understanding of the operations of the housing agencies to say, oh, let's take a look at these things. And then May was the person that ran the data analytics, again, using Excel. But it seems to me, someone like yourself would be sought off after or assigned by the firm to assignments that are going to be data heavy. I mean, it seems like you have a specialization that is going to be in high demand at the firm. I don't know that anybody could have done that analysis that you just described with the payroll rate increase. It doesn't seem to me. Is that true? That, you know, they could just take anybody coming in the firm and staff them to that kind of a requirement, that kind of a procedure?
You know, it just depends on their background and how comfortable they are with, you know, Excel and data tools and whatnot. So for example, there's someone on my team who didn't know how to do a VLOOKUP, so I had to teach them. But then there's other people on my team that, you know the tricky like Excel keyboard shortcuts, and they know how to work a pivot table much better than I do. So I guess like the answer is just it depends. But I do have a lot of people on my team come to me when they have, you know, like a large population, they need help, you know,
manipulating your team. Are these people reporting to you, or is the partner on the assignment coming to you and saying, you know, I had this dream last night that we need to compare payroll rates, so please do that?
I think it all depends. So the partners, they're not totally keen on the technology that we have. They're not really aware of like what we're able to do. So sometimes they don't even come to me and say like, hey, are we able to do this? Although the partner on my main client, he has come to me occasionally with something that is a task that I think like would typically be pretty easy for at least a second year associate. First year associate, maybe not, because I think I learned most of my Excel skills honestly during my internships and actually like working at KPMG. I didn't learn these Excel skills like, you know, in school. But and sometimes it's not even people that are like reporting to me, because you know, I just got promoted to senior. So this was actually a manager that approached me with kind of like their investment population and said, okay, so we sent this population to our pricing desk, which is kind of like our national team that actually like takes the investments that we give them and say, okay, here's your price. This is what it was at 12/31. Just so we can like make sure that everything's correct and consistent. But just the problem was that they sent a population to the pricing desk and just said, okay, well now we have to go through this giant population and figure out which ones we sent them. Can you help us, basically filter the original population to segregate the ones that we sent to our pricing desk? I'm like, yeah, sure.
No, so it sounds to me, I don't know, maybe you may not even be aware of the conversations that are happening behind your back, which is, can we get them on our job so you can come over and do this analysis? So I'm thinking having skill in this area is putting you in a position where the firm has plenty of work for you to do. So the question, is the data analytics going to reduce the amount of staff needed while having those skills? Excel is a good starting point, but going beyond that is a key piece of ability that you want to get under your belt sooner rather than later, I would think.
Mm-hmm. And at KPMG, I'm not sure if other firms would do this well. I'm sure they would. But you have the opportunity to do kind of like rotations into other, practices at the firm and whatnot. And I did a just brief 2-week rotation with our data team. And that's when I was, advising them on their population that they were creating. But I think it's something that even if you didn't, go through a master's of accounting with a data analytics program, that it's like if you just spoke up to your performance manager and said, hey, I would like to at least do some trainings on these tools, they can probably work with you and they can set some time, on your schedule for you to actually do that brief rotation to work with the data team and learn how to use those tools. Because a lot of the tools that KPMG has accepted for use in the audit, I don't think anyone really uses. So we primarily only use Excel and IDEA, but there's all these other softwares that no one knows how to use, but they're, acceptable to be used on audit. Like the firm has, passed off. It's like, great, you can use these tools, but again, no one knows how to use them. So what I've learned in public accounting is you got to speak up for yourself. If you want to go, try something, even if it's just doing like an international rotation, you got to speak up for yourself. And it's like, typically they're very good at working with you to, meet your desires and needs and whatnot.
We got another question. And if you're chatting a question, I see it there, we'll get to it.
So I was curious on how you've incorporated digital or data visualization into your work papers, because I don't know, it seems like you have to come to a conclusion, right? And so it's hard, like when you have like a digital data visualization, to come to a direct conclusion. You can speak to it, but it's like hard to just say, okay, it looks kind of like it's going in the right direction.
Yeah. So here's the catch.
Yeah.
You can't use it as audit evidence.
Okay.
So I think that's kind of where little some miscommunication on my part came through. So you can use it to help, like assess risks and like identify specific like populations. But if you are just kind of like creating, let's say like a line graph to say, I'm not even sure like what you could possibly use like visualization for in terms of like trying to gather audit evidence. Most of it comes from, like tested details, whereas, if you're summarizing items, I wouldn't think that that's actually testing the underlying. Oh yeah, that would be fine. We do that actually. For some reason we do this like industry update for our client where we look at their competitors, once they release their quarterly information, and we look at like revenue. The industry that I work in is kind of like the healthcare industry. So it's like membership of, like the insurance, medical costs, and some other factors that we'll compare our client against the different like large companies and just like across the US, and just kind of show them like, okay, this is how you're doing and this is where your competitors are at. And we mostly give them like a bar graph, I think, of those items. So
and you're using Excel for that, or because you mentioned you used Tableau before, and I've used Power BI, which is like basically the same thing, but the Microsoft equivalent. And I don't know, it can do some pretty cool stuff. Like, I don't know, you're nodding your head like you've used Power BI before. Like you can ask your data questions. Like there's like a little box where you can like ask questions to your data. And I was just curious if you've like started to incorporate some of those like new features that have come out.
Yeah, no, not yet. We haven't, done any like interactive, I guess like insights or data visualization. If that's what you're referring to, are you referring to like the interactive stuff where it's like, well, if we change this and this and this, and like let me just like move a couple things here, and then it's like a whole different chart. We haven't done that stuff yet, although if I taught my engagement manager how to do that, I think she would love it and she would want to use it immediately. But she's a very busy woman. Probably doesn't have time.
Kalyan, we did have a question that was typed in, chatted in, and I'm not looking at it, but it was something like, what is the coolest or most difficult data analytics type assignment or engagement you've been on?
I've only really...
We're not asking you to choose amongst your children, right? They're all excited.
Yeah. I haven't really had that many opportunities on clients to use data analytics. During my program internship, when I came out here, I was primarily on asset management clients, so like hedge funds and venture capital funds and real estate, and there's just not a lot of data there that we can use. I mean, of course they have their investment portfolio, but we just send that to the pricing desk and they take care of it. So while there's opportunities there, especially, being able to vouch the investments back to the broker statements, it wasn't really something that I was doing necessarily. And I've only been on one extremely large client, where we have that data to work with and, do the different routines. So I wouldn't say that I've done anything like super cool yet, other than, be somewhat involved in the automation process of our scoping matrix, because we just did that, last year, almost immediately after I started. But I also, during my internship, I guess I did work on another large client in the banking industry, and that team actually asked me to automate their scoping matrix. So like, the idea was always out there, but I don't think they realized that they couldn't just have the data analytics intern do it, that they actually had to send it to the data team. So I gave it my best shot using, Excel formulas and all that. But so I think that was probably the most fun I had. But again, technically we were supposed to send it to our data team.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Amy, do you have one?
I'm just wondering if you would want to switch to the data team if you could, or do you like doing audit?
I've actually considered it. I think I would probably at least stay in audit, through my full 3 years of being a senior. And if I'm still with the firm at that time, I think I would want to rotate into the data team, because I think it would be beneficial to have someone on that side that actually, you know, knows accounting and auditing, and they have those insights. And I think even like KPMG would approve of that rotation, and they'd probably be like, okay, yeah, sure, go ahead. No questions asked, just go. But yeah, I've definitely considered it, and yeah, still kind of considering it. But you know, I still need that audit experience before I can actually succeed in that type of role, I think.
We got a question. What does the data team that you've mentioned use? Do they code, or what do they do? But I think you kind of answered that, but go ahead.
Yeah, not really sure what they do, to be honest. Sometimes it can be as simple as like an Excel macro. And these macros also might interface with IDEA, where, you know, it's basically IDEA that's running all the work, and then the output is just, you know, spit out into Excel. But they also use the data tools that I mentioned earlier. So like Alteryx is one of the big ones. I also did some trainings with them on Tableau and ClickView, which is kind of like Tableau. So Tableau is like a data visualization tool. And then ClickView is like the same thing, except more coding, more coding involved. It's not as user-friendly. But that's, I think they primarily just use Excel, IDEA, and maybe Alteryx.
The other question we got is, can you talk about the artificial intelligence tool more and what you expect for the future regarding audit procedures in the Big Four?
I actually don't know a whole lot about the artificial intelligence tool. I just know that, you know, KPMG is working with IBM Watson to generate some sort of cognitive technology. Not sure what the goal is to do with it, but I think you can probably find that, you know, that's like, it's public information, and you can find, like, I guess, more about what our goal is with it just by doing a Google search for KPMG IBM Watson. So IBM, like the computer company.
Other questions? I have one, but I think it's so accounting nerdy that I'm afraid to ask it, but I'm going to go ahead.
Not a
What the heck,
CPA,
if
by the
I've
way.
Huh?
Not a CPA yet, but I can try me.
Oh, no, yeah. Now, my question, we talked about the requirement to look at documents that are outside of the financial statements, MD&A, supplemental information, and the auditor's responsibility is not as significant as it is to the financial statements, but we are required to look to see if there are significant inconsistencies between information that's maybe provided in the MD&A and the financial statements, which we have audited. Can data analytics help you with something as tedious as that? Because I always look at that and so I got to read this MD&A.
Yeah.
I got to figure out all the things they put in these MD&A and then somehow see if that's consistent with the financial statements. And I was sort of praying that, you know, some of the tools that you're talking about would help with something like that.
That's actually, I think, one of the uses for the cognitive technology. So going back to the question of, you know, what does the cognitive technology do? I think that might be one use for it, where you can actually feed the machine or the computer, whatever, however you want to refer to it, as, you know, you can just give it the information and it'll read through it for you and identify the inconsistencies with the, you know, text recognition and knowing like where it's supposed to tie to, for example, especially because, you know, like with public companies, everything's pretty like structured and consistent. So that's something that's pretty easy to just go through and say like, okay, so this needs to go here, this needs to go here.
Other questions, guys? This has been great.
I can say a little bit about AI. I know one of the uses is to be able to look at a lease, because there are terms in the lease that have accounting and tax and legal implications. And so for AI, the Watson or whatever program is being used can look at the lease and identify things that like aren't in the right place or aren't consistent or have language that it recognizes, like words put together that aren't, and over time, the more they see, the more it can learn what's okay and what's not okay, or what's a flag. You still need people to then look at it and decide whether it's a problem or not. But I don't know, I just heard leases are one area because it kind of touches, as I said, tax, accounting, and legal. So that's a good use of artificial intelligence where a person might not know all the different components.
Yeah, especially like as an auditor, I know nothing about, the tax requirement. Well, I guess I could know about the tax requirements with it, but like the legal, going through the actual like hard copy, well, not hard copy, like lease, and like making sure that they're following what they're supposed to be following in, like, oh, like, does this actually create, like, just by this information presented, like, is it an operating lease? Is it a finance lease? And we do have like automation tools to like recalculate the liability necessarily, but that's still something that like on our own, I think we would have to figure out, like, okay, is it operating or is it finance? So.
Other questions, guys? Okay, well, there is lots of more pizza. I'm going to put that out there. Sorry, you folks that are not with us in the room here, but you want to come over to 536 Mission Street and hurry up. We got some pizza here, but those in the audience, please feel free to take some with you, take some waters with you. I carried them up here. I'm not carrying them back. I barely made it. But Kalyan, we want to thank you. Let's give her a nice round. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It was great. We'll have you back again and again and again. So that was great.
Maybe Sadell can come share her experience.
Okay,
Since
yeah.
we work on different teams. So if you can reconnect with her eventually, maybe it would be.
Well, you're not going to get rid of us that easily, but yeah, we'll
I'll
reach out to
I'll come back with Sadell.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good job.